Welcome to Valemount Votes. This is VCTV's series of one-on-one interviews with the candidates for mayor, for council, for regional district, area H representative, and this year, for the first time, the School District 57 trustee for the Robson Valley. And we're here today with Harold Edwards. Harold, welcome.
Thank you. Who
is a candidate for Robson Valley's brand new seat on the School District 57 board. So before we begin, I think it'd be nice for people who don't know you to maybe just have you tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name is Harold Edwards. I've lived in the Robson Valley since 1970. I've lived on my farm west of McBride since 1971. And I was 18 years in the logging industry. I was a hand faller back when people cut trees down that way. And then I was, for 18 years, I was a high school teacher in McBride, teaching mostly a forestry course and senior maths. And since then, I've continued to sub in the high school, so I still have some ideas what's going on there. And I've maintained my farm throughout that time, and I was part of a company that built a run-of-river hydro project in Castle Creek, a 6-megawatt hydro project. So I have some entrepreneurial experience in that regard as well. I think that's sort of a brief bio for me.
Okay, great. Let's get to the questions that we have. So our first topic is actually on the creation of the Robson Valley seat. So it's a brand new position. It's the communities of the Robson Valley have for many years been advocating and fighting for a seat, for some representation individually on the board to, I guess, allow our rural concerns to be heard a little bit more strongly. We finally have it, so that's a great thing. The question is, be careful what you ask for, because now you finally have it. My question is, how do you feel about this historic creation of this new trustee seat on the school board? And do you feel any added pressure about potentially being the first person to undertake this role?
I definitely do feel an added pressure as being the first person in the role, because the first person in the role will be setting the expectations of the other people on the board as to what they can expect from the rural representatives. I've been on council for the last 2 years in McBride, and we've been advocating for this thing. So I've been part of the process of having this happen. And yes, the pressure is definitely there, and my response to it is I have some ideas, which I'm sure we'll get into in a moment, as to what are the agenda that we should be following in order to make that a fruitful and a worthwhile change in the governance of the School District 57.
Okay, great. Well, that kind of brings us into our second topic anyway, which is what is your role? So this is an important position. It's you're one of the individuals that will be helping shape the policies that will define education for the Robson Valley children. If elected, what do you feel your role in the Robson Valley on the Robson Valley School District is, and what should it be?
The way I see my role is, first of all, there's going to be a learning component to seeing, how the ins and outs of how policy is set at the trustee level. But in addition to that, I think that what I would like to bring is a change in tone, for one thing. When I've gone to the school board has had some meetings in McBride and Valemount, and when you go to those meetings, there seems to be an attitude of what is the minimum that we can offer to students in these remote and rural areas. Mm-hmm. And I want to change the tone from that, and let's look at what is education going to be like. What are the outcomes we're hoping for all of our students, and then how can we get to that? It's a difference of tone as instead of looking at what's the minimum amount we can spend in these areas. What are the objectives first? Then asking how can we fund these objectives.
Right, and that attitude likely comes from a purely funding perspective, right? Well, we have these dollars. What can we basically do with that, right? Not what's best for it. And education is changing, obviously. The way we're teaching our students is changing. Okay, great. Let's move on to that topic, actually, funding. So funding is a major challenge for facing all schools in the province. It's no different here, but particularly rural schools and remote schools like we have here in the Valley. The provincial government's decision to fund school districts on the number of students is that's their fallback position. It's not working. I think people almost unanimously agree, especially in rural schools, it's not working. What are your thoughts on this current system that we're in with funding? And also, would you like to see changes to that system? And if you would, what would those changes be if you could wave a magic wand and come up with a new formula?
Yeah, as being on council in McBride, we've had meetings with at the UBCM, Union of BC Municipalities. We meet with the various ministers, including the Minister of Education. And so I've had, for 2 years, I've been making that case that we need a new funding formula. And they're on sides with that. And they understand that this formula is not working and it needs to be changed. And to me, the basic outlines of the funding formula change would be you have to separate the funding for the building and for the physical plant,
right,
where education is taking place, from the per capita funding. And if you don't do that, then you're unfairly pricing the small schools out of existence,
right,
which is what's been happening.
Just as much to operate a school, if not more, in a remote community, right?
And then as school populations go down, that cost stays the same, but it's spread over fewer and fewer students. And so that you need to decide, if you're going to have a school open, this is what it costs to run that school. And then that's one pot that the money comes from, and then there's another pot that's how can we provide educational programs and services for the students.
And in your discussions with the education minister, was that topic discussed?
Yes.
Or did they discuss alternate funding methods? Do they have any ideas?
You only have a few minutes in each of these meetings. I mean, it's 15 minutes, and the first 5 minutes are shaking hands. So
right.
You don't get into any level of detail. But I mean, they're enthusiastically on side with the changing of the funding formula. That's not really a topic for discussion anymore. What we're now entering onto is the stage of figuring out what is that funding formula and how will that be, how will you fill in the details of that. And so far I don't know of any specific attempts. I'm sure that there are people working on it, but I don't know about that. And that's where I'd like to be involved at the School District 57 level, is providing some of that input as to how that is going to be structured. Because the simplistic way I've been looking at it here is undoubtedly short in terms of detail. Like there's a lot of details as to how that needs to be finished up.
In your research on our district, have they come up with any innovative ideas for funding for rural schools?
Not that I've seen. There's an issue whether all the money that this province sets aside for rural schools actually gets to places like McBride and Valemount.
Really?
That's one thing we found out, that it's a hard number to find out, and it wasn't me, it was Karen Dubé and McBride has found that only a small portion of that money is actually directly gets to the rural schools. And I would like to just make the distinction, I think you've already used it, there's a difference between rural schools and remote.
Right.
Prince George, a lot of Prince George is considered rural schools. Well, compared to us,
is that right?
It's quite different.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to, and this wasn't my idea, this was Councillor Thompson's idea, of making the distinction between rural and remote. Like these really small schools like Valemount and McBride and like Dunster used to be, those little schools are quite different. in some positive ways. There's some positive things that we can maybe get into as to what small schools offer compared to larger schools. And but I do think it's worthwhile to make that distinction between rural and remote.
Right, and there are really two levels of educational funding we're talking about here. One is for the basic programs that are offered, and two would be the programs that everyone would like to see brought back: music programs, drama programs, art programs, shop programs, those types of things. What do you feel, is there any leverage there? Because I mean, I'm an older guy, and I remember all those, and I remember how they added to my skill set as a person, and I think it'd be valuable for students.
It's very valuable. As I said before, I taught senior math, and because I was teaching that, you do a fair amount of research into what's being looked at in a research point of view. And it turns out that music in particular and math are very closely allied. If the people who have access to music do way better in math than the people who don't.
Is that right?
Yeah, and so it's not like you can say, well, there's the important subjects, math and English, and then there's all these other unimportant ones. Those so-called frills are actually part of what makes human beings able to be adaptive. I mean, even in something that you'd think of as quite cut and dried like math, the human brain still thinks in terms of analogies, and analogies come from having a broad experience in human life. And so that's what I was referring to earlier where I was saying that we need to look at what do we want to offer to our students in order to bring them along into becoming the type of citizen that we want. And that includes all these other things as well: sports, music, fine arts, drama, shop, all those things. I mean, what percent of students go on to university? It's about 30%. What about the other 60% that want to have good paying jobs in trades?
Right.
Well, that's where I taught shop. In a small school, you teach everything. And I taught in the shop in McBride for a few years, and that's one of the things that you see there. There's people who develop other sides of their abilities in a shop environment.
Right,
for
and those,
example.
we need those people here because the tradespeople that are here are getting older, and there doesn't seem to be any system in place as there used to be, the old apprenticeship systems, and et cetera. There's not many people stepping up to take those positions away. So, which means we're going to be even more reliant on Prince George and in our case Jasper and Hinton to get services. So you would support a more balanced curriculum then that would include more things like arts and drama and music?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Okay. For the reasons I've just mentioned, they're part of what we do. The point of becoming a more educated person is to have access to all those other things. No one goes to work and then comes home and just sits. Like you always have the other things that you do that make your life worthwhile. Right. And those skills are developed in a lot of these other areas, whether it's handicrafts in your shop when of an evening, or singing, or playing music with someone, or being involved in a theater production. All those things are what enrich our lives, and surely we want those things for our students in areas like Valemount and McBride.
Yeah, I see these comments all the time from people of my generation, and that's, well, kids today don't know how to change a tire, they don't know how to cook, they don't know how to do these things. I said, well, who's teaching them, right? They're not going to absorb it by osmosis. Somebody has to teach them, right? Yeah. So, well, hopefully the new trustee would be successful in that, because I think it's very valuable. We've seen from a personal example, Dan Kenkel, who is now the principal in McBride, when he was here, started up a music program on his own, getting instruments donated. I believe he's doing that at McBride now as well. But you see the confidence level of the students, and you see the outgoing personalities of the students when they can do that, or when they can be in a play, etc. Just exponentially jumps out and makes them more confident people. And surely those skills must transfer into other things in their lives, right? Yeah, I totally agree. I coached basketball in McBride for a lot of years, and that confidence of seeing how
the confidence changes in people as they learn to do things that they thought were quite difficult, and seeing people being challenged in any different level.
Right, absolutely. Well, let's move on to our fourth topic, which kind of goes hand in hand with funding here, and that's staffing at our schools. Given the way the economy is here, or the funding formula that we talked about, or perhaps a new formula, it has a tremendous impact on the number of teachers that can be hired and the type of teachers that can be hired, and of course the programs that can be offered as well. So the question we have for you is, so we face challenges here both in Valemount and McBride with student numbers. It's always a challenge, resulting in frequent talk of amalgamating schools or closing schools even in a worst case scenario. Because of the funding formulas, as I say, it can be difficult to offer programs or maintain programs, resulting in teachers here having to teach multiple programs. And that's not unusual in a small community, but it gets to a point where it stretches teachers too thin when they have to do too many things, or they end up having to drop something that we discussed was a valuable program. Can you talk about your thoughts on staffing for our schools here, and what changes, if any, you'd like to see in terms of the way we staff our schools?
That's the hardest of all the things that you're going to look at is how you do the staffing. But let me start by saying that technology has changed how information is transferred. But as a teacher, it's really clear that education and learning is a social interaction. It's not a matter of lining the students up and pouring facts in their heads. It doesn't work like that. What really matters is creating a social situation where learning can take place. And that sort of facilitating role is what teachers are going to be doing more and more of. Facts are cheap in our world today. Right. You have a Google and Wikipedia that you can look up all kinds of facts. You need to build, what you're trying to do when you're in education is trying to build a scaffold in the brains of the students that they can use to interpret and understand the world that they live in. And so all that process of learning how to incorporate new ideas and assess the worth of different ideas that you hear about, that's the core of what needs to be done. And so to get back to the staffing question, that's what the staff is going to be involved in, is how to work on that process of how people are going to be able to, the students are going to be able to learn and understand the world that they live in. And so the short answer is that staffing is really key. You need if you cut down on something, that's the last thing you should cut is staffing. For example, the grounds person, when they come all the way down from Prince George to mow the lawn, and that, to me, that's not a good use of funds. And the same thing, there's all kinds of outreach programs from Prince George. That it's better if we have those people located in Valemount and McBride, for example. And so I think that and it's jobs, and we need jobs here, and we need people that are earning in our community, and those things are all part of what is important for our communities.
So when you're looking at the money that would be allocated to our schools, and we're talking now about the importance of maintaining staff, the importance of maintaining programs, the importance of perhaps adding extracurricular or at least arts and culture-based programs in there, it becomes a big challenge, right? The challenge mounts exponentially the more you add on to it. So. Yeah. You would have a good battle ahead of you, and I hope you'd be prepared for that, because it's, as you say, it's very tough. But things are changing, as you say, and programs can be delivered in different ways. Certain programs can be delivered in certain ways, but there's no replacing that. As you say, facts are cheap. I can go on and Google something, but I don't know why. Right. I don't understand how how it relates and how it happened and what the context of that is. I just know the fact, right?
Right.
And that's what teachers can help you do, is help you think through not only the fact, but what led up to the fact, what are the implications of that fact in the future, how it affects your life,
Yeah.
you know, and relates to
and that's what I meant by you need to help the students develop a scaffold in their brain
Right.
as to where these facts fit in and how do they relate to each other. And a lot of it is because facts are so plentiful, you need to help students understand whether they want to accept an actress in Hollywood's view of the world, or if they want, or what about the experts? You know, keeping in mind that you want to have a healthy skepticism about what the experts are saying.
Right.
But you also need to know, well, these people have spent a lot of time studying this, so you have to give a certain weight to people who've studied an area of interest. And not that there's anything wrong with being an actress in Hollywood, but actor, you know, that's not
But it's
the
opinion
point.
based.
The point,
right?
that's an opinion,
Yeah.
and you need to balance that idea with what the sort of the accepted
Right.
view of a given topic would be.
It must be challenging for teachers and students in this day and age, because when I was younger, you know, we'd pull out the encyclopedia and that was the fact, and that's what we went with.
That's right. Yeah.
There wasn't 7 versions of that fact.
Exactly.
It was that. So.
And that's what I mean by getting. You have to put you want to help students develop a way of evaluating that, and that some of that comes from having a structure of what the world looks like, and understanding that part first before you start fitting facts into that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Let's talk about education a little further and preparing our students. So our students in smaller communities here need the preparation for their futures just like they would in larger centers, of course. They require specific classes, they require specific averages and grades to be able to apply for post-secondary education. However, as we discussed under the staffing, with student numbers dictating the funding the way it's set up now, and funding dictating the hiring of the number of teachers that you can have, it's often impossible for our smaller schools to offer the programs that are needed, just the base core programs that they need, meaning that students have to take programs in an online capacity or find other ways to be able to get the credits that they need. Fortunately, we have 2 great assets in the Robson Valley as far as I'm concerned, and that's Derek Shaw here in Valemount and Dan Kenkel in McBride, who are both very experienced and innovative principals who understand how to work within the system with smaller student numbers, try to get the most out of them and offer what can be offered, and try to reach out and find ways to get those programs delivered that we can't deliver here. So the question is, how do you so what are your thoughts on the reduced student numbers and how they're affecting Robson Valley students here? And do you have any ideas for improving that current situation of educating and preparing our students?
There's not much I can do about the numbers. That's determined by the number of people who live in the valley. But speaking from the McBride end, there's a Mennonite school, and then there's a Seventh-day Adventist school, and then there's a number of people who now homeschool. And so it seems to me that what public schools need to do is to start working on ways of making themselves more attractive. And some of this comes into what we were talking about earlier about the frill subjects, the music, fine arts, drama, those kinds of things are part of what can make a school attractive to start helping with those numbers by drawing people back from other ways of learning that are happening now. So I think that is one thing that can be done to help with the numbers. The other thing is to be glasses half full about it and say there's some real positives. When you have the student numbers the way they are now, your staffing to student ratios are obviously
smaller class sizes. Yeah.
Smaller class sizes, and I know from teaching Math 12 that being able to be really specific about how you explain things to different students. I had the time. I can remember a couple of different. I remember. We were talking about hyperbolas, and I was one fellow. He had to have everything on his paper all organized, and when he made a mistake, he would erase it, and because he needed to have it laid out on a piece of paper, very, very clearly and in very organized fashion. I walked across the classroom, and I was talking to a young woman who was very visual and very imaginative, and so I would help the one fellow and fill in his format that he was working on, and I'd walk over and talk to her about, well, a hyperbola it's like a circle turned inside out. And she'd go, oh yeah, and so that's the kind of thing that you benefit from.
Right, you can't
with
do that
having
in a
this.
class
You can't do that. If you've got 30 students, you'll be able to do that with 1 or 2 students. But you can't tailor the learning to each student's learning style.
Right.
And that's we need. That's the what I'm getting to is that's being really specific about how you understand people's way of learning is a positive that you can offer, and that you can sort of start to draw back some of those numbers.
Yeah, that is a big positive that we don't often think about, right?
Yeah.
My experience in the schools is mostly here with Dan Kenkel as principal of Valemount, and just recently moved to McBride. So I kind of know more about his theories about education and the way he approaches it. And I recall having a conversation with him about, one of the things that we have that is quite unique is we're a mountain school. Yeah. And I said, what does that mean? He says, well, we're located in the mountains, so our education can be somewhat mountain-based in terms of, we can have a cross-country ski outing. We can have these types of activities that build on the skills that they already have, but enhance them by, talking more about the environment and ways that we can improve our world that we live in. I thought that's a really unique way. And he also talked about how that would be a real attractive thing for international students. Bringing international students in to study in that program because they want to come to Canada. A lot of them want to come to Canada, and to come to a situation like that where they're in a small, remote or rural, whatever you want to call it, community in the mountains, in the Rockies or in the Caribous or whatever, is quite a unique opportunity as well. So, there are things that we have here. We're always talking about what we don't have, but there are lots of things that we do have, I think, that we can use to our benefit.
Yeah, my wife and I have had quite a number of exchange students in our home over the years, and that speaks to that exactly. Like they're just amazed at how people live in where we live, and it's totally different from Berlin or wherever they're from, and they really value that. And so you're right, that is a selling point that we have for attracting students into our area.
Right, and those students, as I understand, they pay their own way, right?
Yeah.
So that's money coming back into the system that would not be there otherwise.
Well, exchange students, there's an exchange, and so someone from Canada goes over to Sweden or whatever.
But if someone wanted to just come here and study in one of our schools, they would have to pay their own tuition.
Yeah.
Let's move on to something that's important, that's timely, and perhaps a little bit challenging. And that's cannabis. As you know, recreational cannabis becomes legal in Canada on October the 17th, less than 2 weeks here. I'd like to know if you know what School District 57 policies and guidelines are on cannabis, and how it might relate to our students and their schools. Has there been discussions on this, or do you have some personal thoughts on this? It's an important topic. I mean, we want to make sure that we're doing something that's now legal, but it's a big change.
Yeah, we've been dealing with this at Council in McBride, and to be quite frank with you, I don't know what is the right thing to do. We know that the research is showing us that cannabis is a problem for young brains. We know that young people's brains aren't really fully developed until they're about 20, and so we need to make sure that those things aren't that legalization of cannabis doesn't affect our students, and the exact mechanism how we do that is unclear to me at this point, and I hope to be guided by people that will research that and give us some guidance. I think that clearly we need to make sure that it doesn't have a deleterious effect on our students.
Yeah, it's. I don't know if they've had those. I'm certain they must have had at least preliminary discussions about it at the school district level. However, like our council, and I don't know if the same thing applies to McBride Council, they just don't have the information yet to start making bylaws and putting in place controls. And
Yeah, we know it's going to be legal on October 17th, but we don't know a lot more than that about what it means for how it's going to be sold, how it's going to be available in the community. I think that legalization is a good thing. I think it's not necessary to make things illegal to control them,
mm-hmm.
and I think that's the correct approach is to figure out how to control the use of cannabis in a way that doesn't harm our students.
Right. I'm assuming that perhaps it will be treated in a similar way to alcohol in terms of both student and faculty use, but hopefully they can get on top of that quickly. And it just seems like, well, they picked an arbitrary day here, but we're not ready. Nobody seems to be ready that I know of. For this.
Just speaking from the council point of view, that it's because the rules haven't been laid down. It's so close to the legalization date that it is. I think it's going to be a work in progress. Mm. I think the main thing of legalization will be to start to cut into the benefit to illegal sale,
right.
And if it cuts back on the amount of money that's going into the underworld, I think that's probably a good thing.
Right.
But,
and then there's the safety side of it as well, because you don't know what those drugs on the street have been laced with, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Fentanyl or any kind of thing of that nature. So, but hopefully they can deal with that quickly, because it's basically a full school year, almost October 17th, or a month and a half into the school year, and you're going to have to deal with that situation. Mm-hmm. For our last topic, I thought we'd just leave it open, just to see if there's something that we haven't discussed that's important to you, that you feel you'd like to bring up in terms of your approach or in terms of how you see things in the future.
I think we've touched on most of the things that I would be interested in. One is the extracurricular.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me.
Bless you.
The extracurricular ideas, that's going to be important. I think maybe one more thing too that I haven't really talked too much about is decentralization. Every little town in BC used to be their own school district, and they were amalgamated in order to make purchasing, for example,
right.
cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you buy 100 computers, it's cheaper than buying one. And so I think so some aspects of centralization has worked, but as we're seeing now with rural and remote schools, as being part of a really large school district, as School District 57 is, that maybe it's time to have more money being allocated from the local schools, trying to keep your purchasing advantage of the large mm-hmm. body, but if there can be more judicious use of some of the funding because the local people know more specifically how that money is going to benefit their own classrooms.
Right.
And I think that and I'm just feeling my way along with this idea, but I think that there may be advantages to having some of that accountability come into the local schools. And I would like to see how that can be done. But again, that's a matter of discussion with accountants and
right.
That sort of level of understanding. And there would be one more thing, since we're
sure.
For 40 years, I used to go into the high school and play basketball. I'm also in theater, and the theaters, the school's theaters have been wonderful places to put on plays. But I know in McBride we haven't been able to put on our shows in the theater because it costs too much.
Right.
Yeah. And we used to just have a key to the school. We would go into the school, we'd play basketball, and we would clean up after ourselves. There was never a problem. And I hope that we can, and this is part of the decentralization idea of getting to where instead of having rules that have to apply to the whole district, if there's some way of having local schools become more the central part of community activity that they used to be. And I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why it's happened this way, and liability, and all. There's lots of reasons. It's not a simple. You can't do it by just by fiat. You're going to have to work through what are the implications of it. But I do think that is a worthwhile objective to try to get more so that the local citizens feel like there's more ownership of their own schools and more activities happening in the school.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because that is an interesting point here. I mean, we have a situation in the summertime. The school closes 1/6 of the year. You have no access to it. We have our community theater is in the school, so we can't access it for 2 months of the year. And when we do want to access it through the rest of the time, it's expensive. It's booked through the village office. You must have your liability insurance. You must have all these types of things, and it kind of discourages use. When I think a lot of people would take advantage of it, because it's a beautiful facility. Right?
Oh, they are. Yeah, and both theaters are really great places to play, but especially the McBride one, it's you can't afford to, because you need to practice in that. You need to have your rehearsals.
Right.
If you could just pay for the night of your performance, that you can work that into your budget. But having to rent that hall or that room over and over and over again, with a janitor in place, all that stuff, all that is what the cost goes way up, and you can't do it, and so you end up having doing your shows in another venue that is, it's not, they're adequate, but they're not as good as being in those rooms where the community has spent money and effort to make sure that those things are available in the community, and they're not able to be used.
Yeah.
And to me, that's silly to have that situation.
And same thing with, evening classes. You could have yoga classes in there. You could have regular classes or language classes and those types of things in there. But it's, as you say, now you've got to pay this, and you have to pay for a janitor if you're past a certain hour. And, there's just too many caveats there to make it. People just shrug their shoulders and say no. And
when you're closing, and when you're having schools that are shrinking, there's rooms available that should be. Why not have daycares in there? There's some areas could be set aside and become useful for daycare. And same kind of thinking. It's just. And it's thinking outside the box a bit and trying to figure out what are the uses for these buildings that we've all spent money, we've all paid to build these buildings. What's the highest and best use of those buildings? And that's the sort of thinking that we need to get towards.
Yeah, I recall reading about this. The community hub concept is what they were referring to, right? Making a community hub. Well, great. Thank you very much for that. We've got one question here that's specific to you, and it's why have you decided to not run again for McBride Council, so you're a councillor this term, and instead to switch over to run for school trustee in this election? And the second part to that would be, what's the most important quality you feel that you can bring to the position?
The reason I decided not to run for council was I really, as a teacher, I was really committed to education. It really bothers me to see what's been happening with the decreasing enrollment and with the shrinking offerings for especially the high school students. And I've subbed in the elementary school enough to know that there's really important changes that need to happen at that level as well. So that's why I wanted to become involved in the school district. I know that you can hold both jobs, but I don't have. I'm of an age where I don't think I have the time or the energy to do both jobs. So that's why I decided to focus on the school side and not on the counselorship. As to what would be my best
quality, what's the most important quality you would bring?
Probably experience in the system. I know. I'm not sure if that works for me or against me because I have been part of the system. So, but I think that's the quality that I would bring is a fair amount of experience in living in the areas. I know the areas quite well. I've lived here for almost 50 years, and then the other side is I've actually been in the school system and understand to some degree how it works.
I can't see how that can't be a benefit. You know, you're at least splitting the learning curve, taking it way down in terms of what has to happen.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for answering our questions. I'm going to do the same thing we did at the beginning with all the candidates. We're going to give you up to 3 minutes now to do some closing remarks, and you can either do them to the camera or you can do them to me. And whenever you're ready, just please begin.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to address you in this format. I appreciate it. I don't think I'm going to take my full 3 minutes because I think we've discussed the things that are important that I would bring to the table. I would again stress my my experience in the field. I think that my record on council has demonstrated that I am able to work with all kinds of people in a calm and restrained way, which I think is important, especially now, because our populace is getting quite polarized, and I think that bringing a reasonable and reasoned approach to education as well as other things is really important to the world we live in today, and especially to our schools as they are developing in 2018.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I just want to take a moment now to encourage people to get out and vote. It's an important democratic right that people have fought for us to have, and your vote can actually mean a lot here in the small communities of the Robson Valley. 1 or 2 votes can make the difference between getting elected and not. So please don't sit on your hands. Get out there and exercise that right to vote. And just so you have the information, advance voting here in Valemount is on Wednesday, October the 10th from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and that will be at the village office in the council chambers. So Wednesday, October 10th, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. in the village council chambers, and that's at 735 Cranberry Lake Road. And general voting day is Saturday, October the 20th, the same hours from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and that will be at the Valemount Community Hall, which is located at 101 Gore Street. Thank you, Harold, very much for coming in. Appreciate it, and best of luck in your campaign.
Thank you.
And hopefully we'll see you soon. Great. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time.